It's Ashley from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and today is going to be a tutorial on how to make these wonton and noodle cookies as well as the chopstick cookies, but I'm also going to be walking you through my experience with making large orders. Now, I must admit I haven't made a large batch of cookies in a long time, so this was a bit of a process, but luckily I wasn't too out of practice. So a word of advice, I always do all of my baking in one day and then I do all of my decorating in another day or over a series of days. The other thing is I also make sure that my dough is very cold so I don't have to do extra chilling. But with these sticks here, I do some extra chilling because they are a more perfect shape, so I do it just in case. This is literally after hours of baking. Now I do have a convection oven, but I always find it doesn't bake that evenly, so I always have to do it in single batch layers. Whenever I'm doing cookies, I try my best to choose designs where I can actually airbrush the background because dyeing everything and re-dyeing it and making sure that I'm matching colors often takes up a lot of time. So when I can airbrush, I do that. However, some designs do call for you to actually dye the icing and put it on that way. For all of the cookies here, I am using pipe and flood consistency. When you're using the proper consistency, you don't even really need your cookie scribe that much. It tends to just fall into place perfectly. This is actually a football cookie cutter, but I'm turning it into a bowl filled with noodles. So I'm just going to ice the bottom half and I'm going to fill in the top half with my noodles later on. For those of you that are maybe newer to my channel or maybe you haven't watched a whole lot of my sugar cookie tutorials, I stopped using tips with my bags. So making the change over to tipless piping bags was one of the best things that I did. It just speeds up the whole process and it just saves me the time of unclogging any tips whatsoever because all you do is you can squeeze out any clog that might come about. I find that having tons of trays of uniced cookies in front of you can be a little bit intimidating, so I really just like to put on some TV or music in the background and just kind of clear my mind as I'm doing it. Now I'm going to be airbrushing a bowl pattern onto my cookie, and notice that I am airbrushing this before I put the noodles on. This is so that if any of the airbrush oversprays, it's going to be just fine because it's going to be covered by the noodles. About halfway through, I do end up running out of this red airbrush, so as my mother says, for Chinese New Year's, if you don't have red, the next best option is pink. My grandmother really liked to see us in red on Chinese New Year's, but I often opted for pink instead. Now, when it comes to airbrushing, you do want to make sure that your cookie is fully dry before you do it, or else the airbrush tends to bleed into the royal icing itself. Now, when you're making large orders, there's really no need to wait for things to dry or for things to set because basically once you're done that first cookie, by the time you're done that last cookie and you go back to the first cookie, things are pretty set and you can move on to the next step. But if you are a fast worker and you need to dry things even more quickly, you can go ahead and check out my video in the right-hand corner. Now, because I'm airbrushing so many cookies at once, a little pooling is happening on the top. There really is no way to avoid that unless you're really light with your airbrush, but even then, this might still happen. So you may need to wipe off your stencil in between. Now what I'm doing is I'm adding on my noodles. Now in order to add on these noodles quickly, of course you don't just want to use a single piping tip. I am using a large grass tip and I highly recommend that you use a large one. I have a small one and that one just does not do the job because things get clogged so easily. So use a large grass tip and then I'm using really thick royal icing. And how you thicken up your royal icing is you add a little bit more meringue powder and of course some icing sugar and you whip it. You want to make sure that you can still pipe this with relative ease. You don't want your hand to hurt. If it does, that means your royal icing is far too thick. Now, in all honesty, this part was very quick for me. I would say I finished this part in under 15 minutes. For the color of the noodles, I used a very small amount of lemon yellow, and then I actually mixed in some white food coloring as well. Now I'm going to be adding my chopsticks on the top. Now you're probably wondering why I just outline here and I don't fill it right away. The reason being because the chopstick is a very straight line. So I want to make sure to maintain that. Whereas if I filled it in right away, I have a chance of things kind of going a little bit wobbly. So I wanted to make sure that this would stay nice and straight. I also found that the stencil that I chose, because it is very up and down and it's straight itself, also helps to give the illusion that things are nice and straight. So if you do end up messing up your cookie stick, which is a little bit trickier of a shape because it's more perfect, then using a stencil that is up and down like this really will help you. At this point, I was very much done, and I know that some of you cookiers out there probably feel me when you feel like, okay, I just have to make it to this next hurdle, and then I'll give myself a break. So my little hurdle here was I did want to make sure that I outlined all of the chopsticks and I could fill it in tomorrow. And I knew that would be the better option because I knew that my icing would kind of loosen up a little bit, so it would be the perfect flooding consistency for these chopsticks. And now we are on to the next day, so I am just going to flood my chopsticks here, and I am so close to being in the home stretch. But this is the point where I still feel like there was a lot of work to be done, but I felt the end nearing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create those wonton, and I did need to use fondant for this. I couldn't think of a way to do it with royal icing. I'm sure there is a way, I just couldn't think of it in that moment. So I decided to go with fondant. Now this is pretty much the process of making real wonton. So all you have to do is make your little meatball, which in this case is just our white fondant, and then you cut out a square, and you want to make sure that your wonton wrapper is fairly thin, just like in real life, and then you fold it over. You use a little bit of water to adhere those triangles together, and then you use your chopsticks to indent it and join the two edges together. It's pretty simple, but to do it 50 times over is a little bit of a task. However, when you're actually making wonton, and this is especially very popular to do around Chinese New Year's, usually wonton or dumplings, it is usually around 300 to 600 wrappers because there are a lot of wrappers that come in that package. And I never really like to repackage them up again. I just like to get all of them all done at once. Moving into the final stretch here, I'm basically using the exact same piping consistency as I used for the noodles, a little bit looser so that I can create those little lettuce leaves there. The petal tip that I'm using, and I'm sorry I did not get a close-up of it, is just a straight kind of petal tip. There's no tapering whatsoever and no curve. And all I'm doing is just really wiggling it. You'll notice that in the piping bag, I have some green food coloring just kind of mixed straight into that piping bag. Then I have some green that I actually mixed up with the royal icing, and then I have some white in there too. And this just helps add a little bit of that realistic flair without having to do too much extra work. The more tired I get, the less capable I am of counting. So apparently I miscounted how many wontons I needed to make, so I had to make 6 more there. Chinese New Year celebrations are all about gold, so I'm adding just a little bit of a gold splatter here. There we are. There are over 100 Chinese New Year cookies here. Now, this definitely isn't the most amount of cookies that I've decorated at once, but it has been a long time since I've made this many cookies. So shout out to my cookie friends who are still making hundreds of cookies in a week. Now, these were made for a friend just as a favor. But if I were to sell these, I would definitely make sure that these were a custom order only. Even for Chinese celebration time, I don't think I would make these as a stock order. So I would charge $5.50 each for the noodle bowl and $3.50 each for the chopsticks, totaling $450, and all of my pricing is in Canadian dollars. And just as a reminder, I wouldn't give any discounts even for large amounts. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading daily, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys. Bye!